Hi guys, welcome to the video. In this video, I am going to cover the following. We are first going to understand the ZAT VRC section, the different question types and the skills put to test. Then I am going to recommend an order in which you can attempt these question types. This order may work for some of you, may not work for some others. This is what I do and it usually works for me. I'm going to solve a section live. And as I solve the section, as I solve different question types, I'm going to give you some insights on them and I am going to share my final thoughts about the ZAT-VRC system. So let us begin. So my research tells me that uh, the first four, and I have missed here paradoxals. So these first five are by far the most frequently seen question types on ZAT. Of course, RC, the backbone of any VRC section, any exam, critical reasoning. The difference between critical reasoning questions on CAT and critical reasoning questions on ZAT is that they are not a subset of RC in ZAT. So you will have separate CR questions. You will have a small paragraph followed by one or two questions based on logical fallacies, author's assumptions, strengthening or weakening the arguments, resolving the paradox, etc. Then fill in the blanks, then sentence correction, and then paradigm. These five are the most commonly seen question types. So I recommend that you practice these five question types the most. The last, that these two are vocab and grammar based questions. In the past, we have also seen direct vocab based questions in the form of synonyms, antonyms, identify the synonym, identify the antonym. We have also seen miscellaneous question types, such as identifying the correct pronunciation of a word, wherein candidates' ability to understand phonetics or their knowledge of phonetics, so to say, was put to test. We have seen this. When I say miscellaneous, I am talking of a wide spectrum, a very wide spectrum of questions here. But we don't have to bother much about this miscellaneous question type. If we practice the first four or five question types well enough, we should be good to go. We should be able to clear the cutoff conveniently. Okay. Now, guys, this is the order that I follow, and I also recommend that you try at least try once or twice following this order. Start with verbal ability part. That is all the grammar-based questions, all vocab-based questions. Okay. So fill in the blanks, sentence correction, sentence improvement. If there are any synonym antonym questions, start with them. Even if you are not comfortable with grammar or vocab, if you do not have uh, a strong command of these two domains of language, start with them nonetheless, because they are binary questions in the sense that 20 seconds or 30 seconds will tell you whether you want to attempt these questions or move on to the next questions. You don't have to process these questions. Either you know them or you don't. In either case, you can move on in 20, 30 seconds. That is why I often recommend that candidates start with this verbal ability portion. Then you can solve parajumbles. Now, if it were CAT, I would tell you to attempt parajumble questions only when you are done with the remaining question types. But since it is that and parasamples are not thetas, we do have options. Identifying even one concrete pair or mandatory pair helps us solve the question quickly. So attempt parasamples and then attempt critical reasoning because these are short passages. Then go for RCs. Uh, Between critical reasoning and RC questions, you can choose the one which is your strength first. So if you think that CR is not a strength, it is not an area where you excel, you can start with RC. But in any case, you must start with verbal ability and parasamples first. At least that is what I would recommend. Okay. I'm going to solve this paper, this entire set, following the same order. Let us see. Let us begin. All set. RC maybe for later. RC later, 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 later. Later, okay, so we have parajumbles here, we have a critical reasoning question here, we have a fill in the blank question here. Let me start with question number 7. The payoff from dash in education, okay, so return on investment. The payoff means return. The return on investment, do we have investment? Yes, we do have investment. Wonderful. Expenditure is something that does not give you return, really. But okay, investment is a better word in that sense. We say return on investment. We don't say return on expenditure. The return on productivity is clearly not the answer. So B is clearly out. Okay. I am of the opinion that option D or E is going to be the correct answer. The payoff from investment in education is so dash and dash. Okay, so there's a parallelism between the words. If this is negative, this is also going to be negative. If this is positive, this is also going to be positive. The return is so dash and dash that it is almost dash as a predictor of economic change over a 5 to 10 year period. Okay. So the idea of the text is whether it can predict the economic changes in the next 5 to 10 years. Okay. Because the time period or duration is being talked of, the investment the return on investment must be related to time period. Does the return come fast? Does the return come slow? That should be the idea here. All right, which further helps us eliminate options A and B. He's not talking about the degree of return. He's not talking about the amount of return. He's rather talking about the speed of return because time period is being talked of. So A and B, I'm sure, are not the answers. All right, so we have slow. If the return comes slow and it is predictable, wait, slow is a negative word, the return comes slow. Predictable, if the return on investment in education is predictable, that's a positive word. It would violate our understanding here. So E should not be the answer either. Also, please note, if the return on investment in education is predictable, then how is it irrelevant as a predictor? So these two contradict each other. If the return on, I repeat, if the return on investment in education is predictable, so we know what kind of returns will come later, then it is not irrelevant as a predictor of economic change. It is rather irrelevant. So this is directly contradicting. Okay. So between C and D now. Now, guys, first, if I have to choose between expenditure and investment, I'll go with investment. Second, if I say the payoff from expenditure in education, first thing, the expenditure on education, it is grammatically incorrect. It should be expenditure on education if expenditure were to be the correct answer. Second thing, if I plug in powerful in the third blank, if the return on investment or expenditure in education is so fast and significant that it is almost powerful, of course, it is not almost powerful, then it is definitely powerful. So this type of a construction here, almost powerful, becomes semantically void, which means it does not have any meaning, any sense. It is semantically void, okay? Powerful is a relative adjective. It is not an absolute. And almost is used for absolutes or extreme adjectives. Powerful is not an extreme adjective, it is just a relative adjective. So semantically void construction, we have multiple reasons to eliminate option C. Correct answer option D. I do this entire math in under 1 minute, but I took around 3 minutes to explain this question because I'm trying to vocalize my thoughts and I'm trying to tell it to you. I'm trying to articulate my thoughts, and that takes time. Okay. I think I can manage 18 now. The Lannisters had dash gold than the Tyrells. What are the options? They had more gold or less gold? Okay, so they had less gold. So it's a grammar-based question, less or fewer. Gold is an uncountable commodity. You can't count gold. You can measure it in terms of kilograms, but you can't count it per se. It's a commodity, abstract noun. So fewer is wrong. Fewer is wrong. Fewer is wrong. 3 options eliminated. Either A or C. Second blank has to be fewer, so I don't have to bother. Third blank will determine some space time or some time. Okay. Third blank. Where is the third blank? Here. What happens in the story next is dependent on George, the writer of the series. For dash, he has not written anything further. For some time, it has to be some space time. Option A is the correct answer. Which of the following sentences contains correct and the meaningful usage of the underlined words? Oopsie. I forgot to underline the words. Nonetheless, we have to choose grammatically correct answer. So grammar-based question. Let's see. Vikram's approach to the problem was unique from Harpreet's. Redundant. Saying that someone's approach is unique automatically means that it is different from from everybody else. So this part, it is unique from Harpreet's, is a redundant construction. Option A wrong. Option D wrong for the same reason. So it was different from Harpreet's, different from Harpreet's, different from Harpreet's. Okay, Vikram's approach, Vikram, okay. Now what I'm doing here is vertical reading. I read this part, this part, this part before reading all the other parts of all the other answer choices. This is called vertical reading. For sentence correction questions, always read the options vertically. It will make the process more efficient because it will help you discriminate between the options and eliminate them. Okay. But he had not expected no criticism. Okay. Double negative. Eliminated. He had not expected no criticism. Left with C and E, but he had expected no criticism, correct? And he had expected no criticism. Okay. So the difference is between and but. Because his approach was different, the next idea is a contrast. The author tries to draw contrast. Therefore, but is correct. Though his approach was different, he did not expect any criticism. His approach was different, but he did not expect any criticism rather than and. Okay, so conjunctions at play. Poem, the much dreaded part. Critical reasoning, maybe. According to the above paragraph, which of the following options will be true? So it is fact-based question or maybe critical reasoning-based question. I don't know. Assumptions, critical reasoning-based question. Least likely to have a logical fallacy. Critical reasoning-based question. and definitely be interpreted based on the passage. Fact-based question or critical reasoning-based question, again, I don't know. Are other question types done over? I don't know. Okay, we have another. Though he thought of himself as a dash person, what kind of person, don't know. So contrast sign. His boss's abusive behavior made him talk back. Okay. So he generally did not talk back, which means he thought of himself as a docile or non-confrontational, non-confronting person. Okay. Docile, non-confronting, amenable, amenable person. What I'm doing here is deductive reasoning. I am using deductive logic. I'm deducing the answer first before I look at the answer choices. That will help me later. So though he thought of himself as a docile, non-confronting or amenable person, option A says nonchalant, which means carefree. Could be the answer. Though he considered himself carefree, his boss's abusive behavior had him talk back. Okay. Insouciant means the same, carefree. So there's no real difference between the two. Ennui, first, it is not an adjective, it is a noun. And he can't think of himself as boredom, as a boredom person, that too. So it is not only grammatically incorrect, part of speech needed is adjective, not noun. Also semantically incorrect, boredom does not fit the bill. So ennui got, it gets out. Philippic is a rant, a speech full of bitterness, criticism. So this is also out. We need nonchalant or insouciant. So A, B, E remain. Okay. However, as he engaged in a dash with his boss, okay, so remember he was talking back to his boss. So he was confronting him. He had to confront him because the boss was abusive. So, however, as he engaged in confrontation with the boss, or okay, let's see. Remonstration means protest, could be the answer. Philippic is a rant, abusive, bitter speech against someone, condemnation. Well, he he cannot condemn or rant against his boss. He was his boss after all. He can only protest or confront him or argue against him. So Philippic is a bit extreme here. And ennui, boredom, again gets out. Correct answer, option A. All right. So I've been able to solve what one, not many, two, three, and four questions. Probably 8 to 9 minutes. Not bad, not good either. Let me start with paradoxals or critical reasoning. Let me start with critical reasoning first. All right. 16th question. Aarti is planning for higher studies, and her future goals include working as a manager of a non-profit organization. Okay. So she's planning for higher studies. Her future goals include working as a manager for an NGO designed to provide assistance to underrepresented populations. Fair enough. Aarti researched the mission statements of various colleges and discovered that College X, a small private college with a fee of 8 lakhs per year, was dedicated to producing compassionate and curious leaders. So the mission statement aligns with Aarti's goals. College Y, a large institute with a fee of 9 lakhs per year, promoted itself as a leading research facility. Okay. Based on our research, she decided to apply to College X rather than College Y. Which of the following options is most likely explanation of Aarti's decision? It is obvious, easy question. Because the mission statement aligns with Aarti's goals. She wants to work for underrepresented populations. She wants to work for an NGO. Therefore, a college which claims or which says that it produces compassionate leaders will be the first to go. Option A, a direct relationship exists between a college's cost and the quality of education it provides. Irrelevant. And had it been so, she should have rather applied to college-wise, which is contradictory also, in a sense. Students applied to smaller colleges that offer more personalized attention from professors. The question is about Aarti in particular and not students in general. So this is too broad. Why did Aarti choose to apply to college X is the question. A large research university cannot prepare students for a career as a non-profit executive. Maybe the reason, but to say that a large research university cannot prepare, it is unlikely to, or it may be unlikely to. Relatively speaking, it is less likely to, but cannot prepare is an extreme statement. So even this question, this option is out. Students apply to college with mission statements that align with their goals. Now that is fine. If students apply to colleges with mission statements that align with their goals, Aarti's goals also align with the mission statements of College X. That's exactly what we thought even before we read the answer choices. Okay. The best colleges have the best mission statements. Hence, students select a college with the best mission statement. This is vague. What do you mean by best mission statement, and what is the parameter? How did Aarti choose the best? What is the parameter? Not given. So vague answer choice. हवा में बात कर रही है. Moving on. Any more critical reasoning for me? Okay. The size of oceanic waves is a function of the velocity of the wind and of the fetch. So y is a function of x. Y is proportional to x. Fair enough. The length of the surface of the water subject to those winds. This is fetch. Okay. So velocity and fetch, I am assuming x. The average impact of waves against the coastline is a function of the size of the waves. Okay, so this is z. Z is proportional to y, the size of the waves. Okay, so let me write down here. I have left some space. Y is a function of x. Z is a function of y in turn. Well, it follows then z is a function of x. What was z? Z is shape of another variable has been introduced, the shape of the sea bottom. Okay, let us say it is a. So z is a function of y and a. All right. The degree of erosion on the coastline is a function of the average impact of waves. The degree of erosion on the coastline is another variable, which is b, and is a function of average impact of waves. Okay, which is z. So b is proportional to z. Now, which means b is also proportional to y and a. All right. According to the above paragraph, which of the following options will be true? The fetch of the wind is related to the shape of the sea bottom. No. Fetch and sea bottom are not related. The fetch was the x part. Sea bottom was the a part. X and a bear no direct relationship according to our equations. Size of the oceanic waves, which is y, will not fluctuate far from average. Alien idea. We don't know that. Size of oceanic wave y is correlated with the shape of the sea bottom. Shape of the sea bottom was a. So they are not correlated. In fact, they together are correlated with z, another variable. Degree of erosion, which was b. Okay, this is b. Is not related with the velocity of the wind. Velocity is x. B is not related to x. Not really. This is rather contradictory. B is related to x because z is also related to x here. Degree of erosion on the coastline is related to the shape of the sea bottom. So B is proportional to or related to shape of the sea bottom, which is z. Okay, we have already figured it out. shape of sea bottom was A. Is B proportional to A? Yes, B is proportional to Y and A both. So option E is the correct answer. Though guys, why did I solve this question like this? I usually do not have to form mathematical equations. I can do this mental mapping. Okay, size of oceanic waves is a function of something, and then that is in turn a function of something else. I'm usually able to do it within 30 seconds. I'm able to mental map it. But for me, to help you understand how you can solve these questions with 100% accuracy, these are simple questions. Whenever there are multiple variables involved, you may want to write them down and form these equations, which will help you get to the correct answer with the certainty. Okay. More questions on critical reasoning. Indian religious and ethical space is different from that of the Western countries. Okay. The Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita, the Ramayana, and the Mahabharata, etc., enrich Indian religious and social space. Details of the treatment of human values and dharmas have a long tradition. They are often compared, contrasted, and debated by the characters in the okay. In the process, it has given birth to a tradition of dharma, which has been transferred from generation to generation. Ethical discourse was not a one-time affair. From time to time, religious leaders from various regions of India nourished and strengthened the Indian ethical arena. X, Y, Z, etc. were prominent religious leaders. Okay. Which of the following assumptions will make the above paragraph redundant? Redundant means useless. Okay. In this context, all religious leaders mentioned in the paragraph preach the same message. That would make their message redundant and not the paragraph redundant. Because the paragraph does not only talk about their message, it talks about the Indian religious and ethical space being different from the Western countries. Okay. Western religious space do not have details of treatment of principle of dharma that adds to the paragraph rather than make it redundant. So out, opposite. Ramayana and Mahabharata have made it possible for religious leaders to build the tradition. Not really, does not add anything. Seems irrelevant. I'll come back to this option maybe. Western civilizations have been traversed by a different kind of religious leaders. I don't know. Even this seems irrelevant to me. Tough question. Western ethical and religious space has a long tradition of treatment of human values and dharma. If that is so, how is the Indian space different? Even the Western ethical and religious space has a long tradition of treatment of dharma. So Indian religious space is no different from the West. Then I think it is contradicting, but the question says makes it redundant. I'm not able to understand the question. Maybe my best guess would be E, but I'm not comfortable with the question. Had the question asked, make the paragraph, which of the following assumptions would contradict the paragraph? Option E is the answer, but make it useless, redundant. I don't know. Maybe E, maybe some other. So a question not worth attempting. Don't attempt this question. But my best guess would be E, but there's negative marking. Let's leave it. A manager seeks approval for conducting a training program on openness. Okay. He puts forward the following arguments in favor of the program to his CEO. Which of the following arguments is the least likely to have a logical fallacy, which means no logical fallacy. We have to choose the option with no logical problem, logical fallacy. Okay. Option A, we did a pilot training program with a group of employees. Post the program, one of the participants was open to new ideas. Well. We have data insufficiency here. Also, it's a logical fallacy because it's an example of inductive generalization or hasty generalization. Only one employee showed openness to new ideas out of a group of employees. This group of employees could be 1,000 or 1 lakh. And that's a really poor percentage in that case. So we need more data to see the proportion or the percentage of employees that became open after the workshop. So A has a logical fallacy, eliminated. This program should be good for our organization since it is designed by a leading consultant. Classic example of ad hominem. This is appeal to authority. Because it is coming from a leading consultant, it must be good. Appeal to authority. This is a logical fallacy. Read more about these logical fallacies. Internal studies conducted across the groups and locations showed that openness increases innovation. That's a reason why openness is important. So it does not seem to have any logical issue here. No logical issue. Maybe C is the answer. Let's see. We have only two options. We can either train our employees on openness or suffer the consequences. That's a threat. And this is hollow of any reason. So it has a logical fallacy. Okay. If you really care about the organization, you should approve this training program. Okay. This is appeal to emotion. In simple terms, appeal to emotion. So E also goes out. All right. Correct answer C. Perfect. Easy question. Music probably does something interesting. Okay. Explains neuropsychologist Catherine. It stimulates the brain in a very powerful way because of our emotional connection with it. Unlike brain games, playing an instrument is a rich and complex experience. This is because it is integrating information from senses like vision, hearing, and touch. This can result in long-lasting changes in the brain. This can also be applicable in the business world. Okay, so music causes interesting changes in the brain. All right. Go through the following statements. What is the question? Which of the above statements can definitely be interpreted based on the passage? Okay. Playing a musical instrument is a unique experience involving vision, hearing, and touch. Nowhere in the author nowhere in the passage does the author say that it is a unique experience. It is an interesting experience, not a unique experience. Unique is one of its kind. There is no such experience. There's no parallel. So this is alien idea. One is not the answer. If one is not the answer, option A is out. Option B is out. Option D is out. Wonderful. So statement 3 is definitely correct. I only need to check statement 4. Integrating the five senses is critical in the business world. Wait. Last line says this can also be applicable in the business world. This can suggests it is not really critical. It could be helpful or conducive, not critical. So 4 is not correct. Correct answer option C, I think. Okay. All right. So far so good. Poem baad mein. Are we only left with RCs now? Yes, we are. We have parajumbles. Let's go with them. But its most advanced formulation is called superstring theory. So we have two important markers, but and its most advanced formulation, which even predicts the precise number of dimensions, that is 10. Okay. However, the theory has already swept across the major physics research laboratories of the world and has irrevocably altered the scientific landscape. The theory. So still not the opening sentence I'm looking for. Scientifically, the hyperspace theory goes by the names of Kaluza-Klein theory and supergravity. I think this is the opening statement. Okay. The usual 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time are now extended by 6 more spatial dimensions. I think this is an explanation of the theory. All right. We caution that the theory of hyperspace has not yet been experimentally confirmed and would in fact exceedingly be difficult to prove in the laboratory. All right, so the idea is introduced clearly by 3, which means not much of a help. Options A, B, and D remain. Let's see. All right. One thing that I can figure out is 3 1 is a pair because 3 tells me different names and 1 uh, tells me about the most recent name or the name that is being used these days, most advanced. Okay, so 3 1 is a pair, which helps us eliminate B. All right, A and D, whether 5 2 or 2 5. Okay, it's a tough question, I think. All right, clearly 5 2 is a pair and not 2 5 because 5 says we caution that the theory is difficult to prove in a laboratory. However, the theory has already swept across different laboratories. So this, however, contrasts the idea presented in 5. Option A should be the correct answer. Okay, it was not a difficult question. It is less appealing, but morally more urgent to understand the actions of the perpetrators. Oh, okay, maybe an opening sentence, maybe not. It is easy to sanctify policies or identities by the deaths of the victims. The victims were people. A true identification with them would involve grasping their lives rather than the grasping at their deaths. Okay. The moral danger, after all, first, is never that one might become a victim, but that one might be a perpetrator or a bystander. Okay. All right, all right, all right. I think I can figure out the first mandatory pair. 1 4 is a mandatory pair here. One says it is less appealing, but morally more urgent. And 4 gives me the reason why it is morally urgent because after all, this after all is an important grammatical marker. It connects 1 and 4. Do we have 1 4 up? Oh, yes, we have. If that be the case, I think option C should be the answer. I'm taking a chance here. I'm not sure, but okay, fine. Let us see. All right, so we are done with the verbal ability part. Our C's remain. Wonderful. I'm not going to start with a poem. I'm not comfortable. It is followed only by 2 questions anyway. Not going to waste time. Interpretation. The poems are usually interpretation heavy. Okay. Small passage followed by 3 questions. My uh, sense says it is going to be a difficult passage and difficult questions. If the ZAT setter, if the paper setter wants me to spend time with this passage, if he wants me to solve 3 questions on such a small passage, means it is going to be demand. It is less. It is more likely that it is going to be demanding. I'm not sure, but okay, let's skip it for now. Long passage followed by 3 questions only. Again, if the paper setter wants me to do so, it is going to be probably an easy passage. Probably going to be an easy passage. Let's see if we have better passages. Okay, relatively small passage followed by 4 questions. Maybe, maybe not. Anyway, so we are going to attempt the smallest passage, this one in the end, and then the poem, if time remains. I'm going to start with, anyway, let's start with the first passage. Preliminary reading of the passage. If history does not follow any stable rules, and if we cannot predict its future course, why study it? Okay. It often seems that the chief aim of science is to predict the future. Meteorologists are expected to forecast weather. Economists should know weather, blah, blah, blah. Good doctors foresee, so prediction. Similarly, historians are asked to examine the actions of our ancestors so that we can repeat their wise decisions and avoid their mistakes. But it never works like that because the present is just too different from the past. So idea here till this point is history doesn't help predict future. So it is a futile exercise. Okay. So it is a waste of time. Oh, yes. It is a waste of time to study Hannibal's tactics in the second Punic Wars was to copy them in the Third World War, but worked well in the cavalry battles will not necessarily be of measurement. Okay. Science is not just about predicting the future, though. Okay. This is a twist in the tale. It is not just about predicting the future. Scholars in all fields often seek to broaden our horizon, thereby opening before us new and unknown futures. This is especially true of history. Now, this is going to be the main idea. So, history's chief aims or the other aim, it can't predict future, but it can broaden our horizons. All right. Please bear with my bad handwriting. History's chief aim is to broaden horizons or present with more possibilities than we can imagine, we can think. More possibilities. It opens more possibilities for future. So it does not help us predict the future or choose the right course of action, but it at least informs us of all the possibilities. It broadens our horizon. That is the idea. Let us proceed. The study of history aims above all to make us aware of possibilities we don't normally consider. Same idea, same meaning. Historians study the past not in order to repeat it, but in order to be liberated from it. Each and every one of us has been born into a given historical reality, ruled by particular norms and values and managed by a unique economic and political system. We take this reality for granted, thinking it is natural, inevitable, and immutable. We forget that our world was created by an accidental chain of events and that history shaped not only our technology, politics, and society, but also our thoughts, fears, and dreams. The cold hand of past emerges from the grave of ancestors. It grips us by the neck and directs our gaze towards a single future. We have felt that grip from the moment we were born, so we assume that it is a natural and inescapable part of who we are. Therefore, we seldom try to shake ourselves free and envision alternative futures. That is exactly the idea. More possibilities for future. Studying history aims to loosen the grip of the past. It enables us to turn our head this way and that, begin to notice possibilities that our ancestors could not imagine. Perfect. So I have identified the central idea. Last line, studying history will not tell us what to choose, but at least it will give us more options. Okay, so it does not help us choose, but it gives us, it at least informs us of the various options available to us. Ready for the questions. Based on the passage, which of the following options would be the most appropriate for citizens to learn history? Okay. British names of streets in India should not be changed. Okay, that's a, read the last line again. It does not tell us what to choose, but it gives us more options. Okay. But here we are choosing that British names of streets should not be changed. It's a choice. If you're making a choice, that's not what the author says history tells us. Okay. Every street in India should display, okay, a plaque that lists all its previous names. Wow, wonderful. Displaying the list of all the names is informing about the possibilities, but not making any choice. It should be the correct answer. British names of streets in India should be changed to Indian names. That's again a choice. Names of Indian streets should be based on suggestions generated through opinion poll. That is also a choice, though popular choice. Still a choice. Names of Indian streets should be periodically changed. That's again a choice. All the four options have choice. The only option that does not involve a choice is option B. It will not tell you what to choose, but it will give you options. Beautiful. Closest option, which conveys the essence of the passage. Okay. History, we have understood the central idea. The last line pretty much sums it. History, unlike physics, does not help predict future. Actually true, but not the central idea. Central idea is that history, though it does not help predict future, it helps us in different ways. It at least informs us of the various possibilities. So not the central idea, minor point. History deals with long time periods, not written. History documents the past events related to specific people, not written, alien. There is no strict cause and effect relationship in history, not written. Okay, yes, it was written. It was an accidental chain of events. Sorry, it was factually true, but not the central idea again. History has the potential to make us eclectic. Eclectic means variegated, in our opinion, having various options, diverse possibilities. That is exactly what passage is about. More options. That means eclectic. Okay. A historian successfully, what is the question? Which of the following statements, if true, would contradict the view of the author? We have to contradict the view. A historian successfully predicted a political crisis based on similar events of the last century. Author says that history can't predict. History can't predict. Okay. But here a historian has been able to predict future based on past. So one would contradict the author's point of view. If one contradicts author's point of view, option B, C are out. A, D, and E. So I just have to check 2 and 4 now. Let me check 2 and 4. Using the latest technology, doctors could decipher the microbe causing the disease. Well, author does not, author has claimed in the passage that doctors can decipher the microbe, they can predict, science can predict, history can't. So 2 does not contradict. If 2 does not contradict, option A is out. Option E is also out. Option D should be the correct answer. All right. Next passage. Descartes' assertion that ideas may be held true with certainty if they are clear and distinct provides the context of Peirce's title, How to Make Our Ideas Clear. Peirce argued that an idea may seem clear if it is familiar. Okay, so familiarity is equal to clarity. That is what P believed. Right. Distinctness depends on having good definitions. And while definitions are desirable, they do not yield any new knowledge or certainty of the truth of empirical propositions. All right. It's going to be a complicated passage. P argues that thought needs more than a sense of clarity. It also needs a method for making ideas clear. Once we have made an idea clear, then we can begin the task of determining its truth. So first, clarity, then determination of truth. Okay, fine. Determination of truth. The method that Peirce offers came to be known as a pragmatic method, and in epistemology, pragmatism. We rejected Descartes' method, okay, of doubt. We cannot doubt something for the sake of the method itself, that we do not doubt in fact. In a later essay, he would state his rule, dismiss make-believes. This refers to Descartes' method of doubting things in the safety of his study, such things as blah, 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 which he did not doubt when he went out on the street. He proposed that a philosophical investigation can begin from only one state of mind, namely the state of mind in which we find ourselves when we begin. Okay, if any of us examines our state of mind, we find two kinds of thought, beliefs and doubts. He had presented the interaction of doubt and belief in earlier essay, the fixation of belief. Beliefs and doubts are distinct. Beliefs consist of states of mind in which we would make a statement. Doubts are states in which we would ask a question. We experience a doubt as a sense of uneasiness and hesitation. Doubt serves as an irritant that causes us to appease it by answering a question and thereby fixing a belief and putting the mind to rest on that issue. Okay. So P says doubts. From doubts, we gradually or we eventually move to beliefs. So when there are doubts, you ask questions, you answer the questions. Answering the question gives you beliefs, you get fixated on beliefs. This is the transition process. Okay. What next? Common example of doubt would be arriving in an unfamiliar city and not being sure of the location of our destination address in relation to our present location. We overcome this doubt and fix a belief by getting the direction. Once we achieve a belief, we can take the necessary action. So from belief, spring actions. Okay. To reach our destination, P defines a belief subjectively as something of which we are aware and which appears the doubt, which appeases the doubt. Okay. Objectively, a belief is a rule of action. We have written it. The whole purpose of thought consists in overcoming a doubt and attaining a belief. So from doubt to belief through thought. The purpose of thought is to move from doubt. That is exactly what we have understood. I think we have understood the passage. I think we have a last part. Some of our beliefs may be false since we are capable of error. To believe something means to think that it is true. Okay, so this is new idea. This may or may not be true. Okay, let's see the questions. Passage seems complicated. According to P, for a particular thought, which of the following statements will be correct? Particular thought, okay. A belief always leads to doubt. This is opposite. Doubt leads to belief and not always, not necessarily. A doubt always leads to, not always. It may lead to it. This is extreme. Doubt and belief may coexist. No. Contradictory. They are distinct. It was written here somewhere that they are distinct. Yes, here. A doubt may lead to belief. Absolutely correct. Option E is the correct answer. A candidate has applied for that. Okay. So he has already taken an action. According to P, it indicates that he has a belief. It indicates that he has a belief because action was the last step here, if you remember. From belief originates an action. So the candidate has a belief, correct? He is doubtful, no. He has a doubt, no. So option C and E are clearly out. He has a belief in the ZAT application process, absolutely correct. Because he has applied for that, he has belief in application process only. Does he have belief that ZAT is a good test of ability? Can't say. All that we know is that he has applied to the college, so he has a belief in the application process only. We are going to limit ourselves to this part. We are not going to draw far-fetched conclusion, jump the guns. The candidate believes that he will or she will perform well in the performance again. He has only applied. Whether or not he'll perform, he doesn't have a belief about that. So 8 should be the correct answer. Closest in meaning to the word dilettantism. Well, I know the meaning of the word dilettante. It is here in this sense. Where was it used? Okay. Okay. This guy acknowledges that some people like to think about things or argue about them without caring to find a true belief. There's no true belief involved, but he asserts that such dilettantism. So dilettantism is absence of true belief. This is out. Doubt may or may not be. Guess. Yes. Surety, no. Unlikelihood. Doubt and unlikelihood are exactly the same. So I think option C is the answer. Okay. A person thinks that he has to keep awake for 20 hours in a day to score well in an examination, but is awake only for 15 hours. For the above statement, which of the following options will be right according to P? Okay. If the action is not happening, if he is not awake for 20 hours, it simply means that his belief is weak. No action means it implies that the belief is weak, because if there were belief, there would be action according to P. So weak belief. Okay, this person believed in a minimum sleep of no. This person does not have a true belief. Absolutely correct. B should be the answer. Okay. By the way, guys, I have already, I think, consumed 50 minutes or